Hello and welcome to the MuddyBootz Allotment channel. My name is Nigel Jewkes, and in this new series, Growing Made Easy, I'll be taking a look at some of the vegetables that I grow in easy to follow steps, from sowing the seed right the way up to harvest. The term brassica is one that you'll quickly become familiar with during your early days of growing vegetables. It's actually part of the mustard family, which is quite a big group, and there's a few little surprises in there you may not expect to see, such as horseradish, sea kale, wasabi, conventional radish, watercress and collard greens. But in this episode we shall be looking at the more familiar types. This list may include a few of our favourites, including bok choy, broccoli and calabrese, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, turnip and swede. The growing technique is more or less the same for each one. It's not until we come to start planting out that we might have to go down a slightly different route. But first of all, we need to sow a few seeds. We've got 7 or 8 different varieties here. Just a word of warning before we start, especially to any newcomers. The seeds of the brassicas in general look very similar to each other. And more importantly, once they germinate, the leaves are very similar. That was an expensive mistake that I made the first year of growing on my allotment. I grow a variety of different brassicas just like we got here. But when the pot had gone, they was all together, but eventually they got mixed up in different trays. And come potting out time, I got cabbage with cauliflowers, the odd sprout here and there, which eventually led to the method that I use for marking up my plants now, but that's a different video. Anyway, let's crack on. I sow the seeds individually in modules and usually have 1 or 2 rows per variety. Then I'll put the name of the variety on the label in front. And just fill the tray with any good seed and cutting compost. This one I'm using at the moment is Bathgate. It's called Champions Blend and it's a peat-free version. You want plenty of good drainage on here, but really not much food, because all I'm after it to do is for the seeds to germinate. Once you've filled it with soil and levelled it off, hit a couple of taps just to settle the soil into each of the cells. Then we're ready to start sowing. All that's left to do now is dib a small hole. I'm using this as Sharpie pen's ideal size. I tend to do it around about a centimetre or maybe just a little bit deeper. And that all I'll be doing is 1 seed will go in each hole. You can then top it up with the same compost, but I like to add a little bit of vermiculite to the mix, and then we just water it in. That's all the tray set out now, ready for the seed. While you're pouring out the seed, it's worth doing it over the tray that you intend sowing, just in case you do lose a few. Like that. As you can see, those are the brassica seeds, little tiny round balls, and they all look very similar. These seeds I'm sowing now are brassicas, and I'll probably put just 2 rows to start with. That's a total of 14 plants. I've sown 19 in total, and I've put a little bit of vermiculite on the top where I've filled the hole in. And the next important job to do is make sure you label the row so that they're identifiable when you come to pot them on. I've completely sown now an 84 cell with a good different varieties of brassicas. Where the contents allowed it, I've sown more than 1 seed in the cell, just to, in case we get a germination failure. I'll just show along the bottom there. We've got almost 3 rows of Brussels sprouts, 2 rows of Clapton cauliflower, 2 rows of Calabrese Ironman, 1 row of cauliflower Sapporo, 1 row of cabbage Dutchman, 1 row of cabbage greyhound, and bringing up the end the 2 rows of golden acre cabbage. All's left now is to give them a little water over with a sprinkler, and these will be going into the propagator probably at around 15-16 degrees, and as soon as they start showing I'll be actually taking them out there to harden them off, because brassicas don't like too much heat. Just pop the lid up. As you can see, the brassicas have germinated really well. I think it's not far off 100% that end, and they're more than ready now for pricking out, so I'll be doing that next. I'll be pricking the brassicas out into this 60 cell. It's a root trainer. If you look how deep the cells are, more or less very similar to the traditional root trainers as we know them, like this. The last thing you want is air pockets in the bottom of the cells, so be sure to push the compost right the way down to the bottom. So that's the tray filled up right to the top, levelled off. I've actually put the yellow marking tape on as well, so as soon as I prick them out I'll be sure to mark the varieties, and that will reduce the risk of getting them mixed up. I've just got the tray out of the brassicas now to give it a bit closer look. Some have come on a bit faster than others. The predominant one seems to be the Calabrese Ironman and also the cabbage greyhound. The crispers sprouts them a bit slow, but that's no problem. These will be going back into the Vitapod as soon as I've pricked out the ones I want to start. These are the Calabrese Ironman. I'll be pricking these out first. Be very careful when handling the seedlings because they are tender. You can just prise them apart and get a decent root ball on the side, if that shows there. Okay. And all I'm going to do is plant these right quite deep, more or less up to the first seed leaves. Drop it right down, and it goes. Just close the seed like that, and repeat for the rest. So that's the first tray done. Still quite a few more to do. I'll just run through what I've done at the moment. I've got 3 rows of the Calabrese Ironman, 2 rows of the cabbage Dutchman, 2 rows of cauliflower Clapton, 1 row of cauliflower Sapporo, and on the end I've got 2 rows of cabbage called greyhound. I think might put these on the sandbox with a bit of bottom heat, but I'll leave the tops open unless we've got any risk of frost, and then I'll pop some fleece over the top. Just 1 month from sowing, this is the status of the brassicas now. As you can see, they've come on really well, so it's time to pot them on out of these cell trays and into their own individual pots. I'm going to be potting them on into these pots here. You might think that that's not very big for the size of the pot, but with brassicas I like to keep the roots fairly tightly bound, ready for when they go out into the ground. Some people are put off from using these deep root cell trays because the plants can sometimes be a little bit difficult to get out. One thing to remember is that you need the plant in there long enough to provide a root system which will go down and actually bind itself to the soil and actually form a bond. there's a couple of ways to do it. You can actually squeeze the sides, each side, like I would with a normal soil tray. What I do, I'll get a thin little cane and just poke it up. And providing the soil's not too wet, it should pop up. You can just see that's just lifted up there enough, and that's enough there to get it out. Probably won't get all the soil out the bottom, but there'll be enough there which the roots are attached to, and that'll enable it to be potted on. This is just a normal multi-purpose compost I'm using now. Just put a little bit on the bottom and then we'll get the plant out. Lift it out gently. You see that's come out with a fairly decent root size on it. So obviously that's too deep for the pot. I'm going to lower it in right the way down to the plant level and then just pot it on up to the first leaf. Sowing the seeds and nurturing the seedlings is only half the battle with growing a decent brassica. Really need to take a closer look at the soil that we're going to be planting out in. If you cast your mind back to your school day, you may recall the acid alkaline test, where you had litmus paper, dipped it in. If it went red, it was an acid. If it went purple, it was an alkali. It's exactly the same. The scale ranges from 0 to 14, with 7 being the midway point. Now brassicas prefer slightly alkaline, and that's why I aim to get mine round about the 7.5 mark. If you've previously grown potatoes in the bed, there's a good chance you may have used horse manure, which is a real acid. It sends the scale way below 7, so then you'll need to raise it. And by doing that, you can add calcified seaweed, but my favourite one is using lime. I was once told by a gardener who was on our site, unfortunately he's no longer with us, that to raise it one increment on the pH scale, you need to use 1 pound of lime per square yard, which I guess that would equate to something like half a kilogram to a square metre. It's not advisable to use horse manure and add lime as well, because all I do is neutralise and cancel each other out. The best time to add lime is, I would say, in the autumn or the fall, and let it time to bed in over winter. However, I do put mine on probably about 4 weeks before actually planting out, and that never seems to be an issue. I just rake it slightly in the top, and if we've had no rain for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I'll gently put a hose pipe across as well to let that bed it in. These 3 beds here are marked out for the brassicas to grow in. I've done a pH check this morning, and all of them are round about the 7 mark. So I'll be adding a dressing of, this is lime, top dressing of lime, and just let the rain wash it in. And hopefully that will help again fend off any sign of clubroot. That's the 3 beds, all lime now. I'll leave that on there. We might have a bit of rain, if not I'll tickle it in with one of these 3-prong cultivators. Just emphasise, if you are putting lime on the beds, make sure you've got some protective gloves on, because it can be nasty stuff, and if your skin's sensitive it might even burn. Another feature that the brassicas like is firm soil. They like firm bottoms. For all you no-dig gardeners out there, you're going to cringe now, but for all the time I've been on air, I always do what they call the gardener's shuffle, which is shuffling with your feet close together, digging your heels into the ground to get that soil real firm. Because I've found in the past, if that hasn't been done, slight wind and the brassica moves and it causes the plant to blow. So that's the 3 beds now have been danced upon and tamped down, whatever you call it. So they're ready for the brassicas. There are 2 or 3 different variants of lime available to put on the garden, but all in all, providing they're ground to a fine powder, they should do the job. Probably the most common one, and that's available in most trading sheds, garden centres and stuff like that, is just called garden lime, and that's just ground limestone. The one I prefer is called dolomite lime, and that's a ground magnesium limestone. Applied the same, scatter over the top, but do make sure you're not windy because it blows everywhere. I tend to cover the surface of mine, and I will actually use a 5-prong cultivator just to rake it in lightly. If it's been particularly dry, I'll also put a fine rose of the hosepipe on the top as well. And the final one to mention is one called hydrated lime. That's more common in the building industry, and it's used for the mortar mix and that, but that can be used. Like all chemicals, treat them with respect, use your protective gloves particularly, and hydrated lime can burn, so do beware. The frosty nights have hopefully gone. Nice forecast for the next couple of weeks. Time to plant the brassicas. So I've got them all out ready. Give them a little drink just to freshen them up. Just have a look what we got. On the end there we've got number 12, which is the Calabrese Ironman. Next row we've got 14 there. That one there is called Dutchman, that's cabbage. Number 16 there, we've got cabbage. That's the dog, the greyhound. And down on the front here, number 10, that one there is the Brussels sprouts, that's called Crispus. Split tray here, we've got some 13 and 10. 13 is the cauliflower called Sapporo, and 10 again, we just heard that one, that's the Brussels sprouts Crispus. And right on the end here, we've got number 11, and that there is a cauliflower called Clapton. So they do look a bit miscoloured, some of them do, but they'll pick up. Cold weather can make them change leaf colour, but I think the majority of this case is hungry because they have been in here a really long time. Anyway, we'll spin them round now, and these are the beds that they can go in. Right along the back there, I'll be planting 1 row of Brussels sprouts. That's because they'll be in there probably the longest and also grow the tallest. This bulb planter is really a good tool. It goes down nice and deep, produces a good round conical hole, and it allows the plant to be planted deep. So that's all the holes in, done for the Brussels sprouts. Normally I only put 4 per bed in, but this occasion I've put 5 in, because the Brussels sprouts will actually be in hopefully till Christmas. Right, we're ready to start planting out. Like with all brassicas, you can plant these really deep, up to the first leaf joint. It won't hurt them, does them good actually. Because our site is susceptible to a thing called clubroot, which is common in brassicas, I get some garden lime, I dust the hole fairly generously, and then I also do the plant as well. Pop it down into the hole right deep, as you can see. Give them a real good firming around the base. So with all the sprouts planted out now, what I'll do, I'll give them a watering in I put a handful of lime into the watering can, so it's a weak solution, and I just find that helps bed them in as well. The bulb planter really does come into its own once you've got the first lot of line spaces done. In the centre I've done 4 lots of 4, then we're going to be the mixture of the cabbage, cauliflower and calabrese. And right along the end here, the front row I've done 5. I'm going to be using that for kohlrabi and celeriac. Just about, I think there's about 10 more plants I need to put in, but they're not ready yet. Spent the last hour watering with the hose pipe, and can you believe it, as soon as I'd finished it started raining. Just like most other vegetables, brassicas are not exempt from pest and disease. 3 main ones for me are cabbage white butterfly, pigeons. Now pigeons, a bed this size, if left uncovered, they can strip it bare down to the stalks in one day. That's why I use this protective netting. I'll leave details and a link at the bottom of the screen. This is a strong mesh, lets plenty of light in, but this is 3 years old and still good as new. The other pest, and by far the most worst one for me, is a thing called clubroot. Now this attaches to the roots of the plant, forming little round nodules, as I call it, and it swells and increases, and what it does is actually starve the plant and all the moisture from going up into the roots, and eventually the plant dies. We do have quite a lot of it on this site. However, I've been fortunate. In the very early days there was an item around called Millitox, where you actually diluted it, watered into the hole, and this killed all the spores within the soil around the plant. However, like a lot of other things, it's got taken off the market and that's no longer available. However, there is another product which has got similar features and just as good. That's called Perlka. I tend to use Perlka about every 3 years, and the years in between I just use lime straight round the root ball of the plant. Now Perlka comes in a granulated form. It's actually calcium oxide, and that's spread over the bed at the prescribed rate. But once it makes contact with water, that's quickly turned into hydrated lime, which is absorbed into the soil. Now this is quite popular with the giant veg growers. Regardless of the time of the year, you can usually take a look around and see a brassica in some shape or form ready for harvesting. One worth mentioning now is called the purple sprouting broccoli. It looks a little bit similar to the conventional broccoli or the calabrese as we know it, but it's got much tender stems and it produces quite tall plant with little branches off and florets on the end. Now providing you keep harvesting these, they will keep on flowering. It usually comes into its own early February and it'll go for months. But the big problem with me is that sometimes it's still flowering when I'm ready to use the ground to put another crop in. I did get around this by planting the plant in one of those 30-litre containers that I use for potatoes, and when the ground was required I just lifted the bucket up, moved it somewhere else, and I didn't disturb the roots, and it carried on producing. For me, with brassicas, the best bang for your buck is with cabbages. There's a vast number of varieties available, and these are typically grouped into 3 seasons: spring, summer and winter, which is co-joined by a variety called Savoys. This is based on roughly the harvesting time, although depending on when you sow, you can move the date slightly forward or backwards and actually blend into another season. With spring cabbage, some people take them very early and use leaves, pick the leaves from the outside, or you can wait a bit longer and let it heart up, usually into a point, depending on the variety. My favourite of all the cabbages is the Savoy. This is a really hardy cabbage, withstanding snow and low temperatures. It's got a distinctive real deep green leaf and crinkly, and it's at home on the dinner plate with a roast dinner or in a stew. Well, that just about wraps it up, folks. I do hope you've enjoyed it and got something out of it, particularly the newer growers we have on YouTube now. I have got quite a lot more of this style to release, covering other different vegetables that I grow on my allotment. If you've not already subscribed, there's a button down the corner. Click on that, and also click on the bell, and that will notify you when I upload a new video. So many thanks for watching. I'm Nigel Jewkes. You've been watching MuddyBootz Allotment.